Hello and welcome to HealthTech Hour on UK Health Radio, the world's largest and best talk health radio. My name is Steve Roost, and each week we bring you the best news, views and interviews with the CEOs, leaders, clinicians and founders who are changing the face of the healthcare industry in the UK and beyond. I'm a founder and CEO of a health tech company myself, and I am passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. As always, before we get into the show, just a bit of business. Please make sure you follow the show, which is at HealthTech Hour on the socials. Please also make sure you follow the station, which is at UK Health Radio, to stay on top of all of the great content that's coming up. Another thing I want to mention, if you happen to be a health tech leader and you listen to the show regularly, or if you know someone who is and you think that they'd be a good guest for the show, please get in touch. We're booked up right the way through the end of the year, but for next year, we're already starting to search for guests. So if you can DM us on at HealthTech Hour or contact the station, if you go to the UK Health Radio website, ukhealthradio.com, you can submit your suggestions. We would love to hear your thoughts. You're all smart, intelligent, inspirational people, so please get in touch with your suggestions. So today on the show, it's the first time we've done this. We're doing the show from the PocDoc laboratory, which is in Cambridge, a secret location in Cambridge. When the video goes up on YouTube, you'll be able to see all of the equipment and stuff that we've got going on behind. I had to kick the team out today. They got to go for a pub lunch, and I'm in here doing the show. But yeah, fingers crossed they won't come back in halfway through and, you know, clatter around like a herd of elephants. So on to today's show. This is a return to a topic that's close to my heart and also critical to healthcare systems worldwide. And that is critical to healthcare systems worldwide, which is remote monitoring of patients, which is basically how to check that people with long-term conditions are okay or not okay outside of a clinical environment. So not in a hospital, not in a doctor's surgery. And then if there is a problem, how do you intervene quickly and appropriately and safely and get that person treated in a proper way? So the company we have on today is Dignio. And Dignio is one of the leading health tech companies in this space. Originally started in Norway and now in the UK for quite some time. And we have Dr. Ewa Truchanowicz, who is their UK Managing Director on the show today. Dr. Ewa is a scientist, foremost academic in her field, and a champion of healthcare equality. Ewa, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Steve. I'm very well, thank you.
Good. So it's been a bit of a crazy 18 months. What has the last 18 months been like for Dignio, for you and Dignio?
It certainly has been busy, and we have seen the sea change in attitudes amongst the healthcare providers and other care providers in terms of how the assistance from technology and the support that technology solutions can offer is viewed. Whereas previously it was sort of a nice to have, the necessity to actually start treating, intervening and looking after people remotely because of the necessity of the pandemic has really heightened the perception of tech can actually be a really good thing to employ in your practice.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into all of that. And look, I'm a big believer in this area myself. It's sort of connected to why we started PocDoc. So look, you're preaching to the choir, at least with me anyway. So the show, as regular listeners will know, is in three parts. The first part is more of a kind of an origins about how Ewa came to be doing all the awesome stuff Ewa's doing at Dignio. The middle bit is all around what Dignio is doing to change the world. And then the final bit is really more around, you know, what's the future? We can kick around some topics of the day, obviously remote monitoring, you know, how do we look after patients digitally? How do we look after people when they can't go to the doctors because of whether it's, you know, waiting lists or inconvenience or restrictions? Obviously, this is all really topical. So, you know, and I'm guessing we'll be referring to it throughout the show as well. So, Ewa, as we said at the start of the show, you are a leading scientist, hugely successful academic in your field. And so at what point did you realize that you wanted to embark upon that pathway, you know, however you would define it, as a scientist or as an academic first, or when did you decide, or when did you realize that that would be your kind of initial path?
I've always had an interest in science and the scientific framework of perceiving reality and testing whether what you think is correct or is incorrect has been very well aligned with the way I think and rationalize things. So science was a natural landing place for me. However, very quickly I discovered that actually I'm not cut out for the academia. I love consuming science. I really love reading about the discoveries, the sort of cutting edge blue sky thinking, wonderful concepts and wonderful discoveries and innovations. However, I lacked the patience to actually engage in the process and be the scientist who actually creates science. So very quickly, I discovered that industry is actually closer to my heart. So I crossed over into working with companies.
Okay. And what was the fields that you were focused on in academia, particularly?
So initially, I started off with psychology. I did my PhD with a mixture of psychophysiology, so very biologically focused neuroscience. And then I worked on clinical trials in reproductive health. And following that, I worked on clinical trials within cardiovascular diseases. And at that point, I started running my own pharma consultancy to support clinical trials in early stage of when medicines are tested with their safe to use in humans. And after that, again, I got bored, as one does, having a sort of a mind that requires stimulation. So I started working with early stage medtech companies. And it was during those journeys working with medtech companies that I encountered Dignio as one of the companies that were considering setting up in Britain.
Okay. And so let's just go back a bit, because I think what you said there was really interesting around that you felt like academia wasn't a place where you could best fulfill your, what's the word, particular desires or, you know, idiosyncrasies, for want of a better word. What do you think that, why do you think that that was the case? Because obviously I know there will be some people listening who are academics, there will be people that something that aren't, and there will be people that don't necessarily, you know what the ins and outs of being an academic involved. But I mean, yeah, so why was that the case?
Sure. So I think horses for courses, and I think people should not be afraid of exploring different options in their career choices. This is not like in the olden days that you chose your career for life. It was well trodden, you had your promotion pathway, and you sort of ascended gradually over the years. The reality of the working place today is that you can be adventurous and can try different things. So as an academic who crossed over to industry, the parts of the academia which I found I was not cut out for was the long process that proper science requires, that you will have to wait for a very long time before you see the result of your work. And very often those results are disappointing, because all we see, the things that make headlines, are the fantastic discoveries that worked and the theories that worked. What we don't see is the hours and hours and hours in the labs, in the offices, over the statistical packages that colleagues in science spent. And at the end of it, the pet theory may be proven completely wrong. And that's good science. It's good to fail. But at the same time, it's you don't get immediate gratification. Sometimes you don't get gratification over years. And I think I was just a little bit too impatient for that sort of thing.
That makes sense. And so with what was your journey to digital health or early stage medtech like? Because you could have landed in any kind of corporate environment. There's, right the way from big pharma through to biotech, through to wherever. Like, how come you sort of ended up on that pathway? Was there something specific that drew you that way, or was it just sort of, more by luck than judgment?
So I think it's more serendipity, and I'm a great believer in serendipity. And one of the companies I worked with was a venture capital funded small biopharma company from the US. And the atmosphere of the team, the working practices, the corporate culture of that particular outfit were absolutely wonderful. And that was the type of company I wanted to work with, where they are secure in terms of this is a business which is viable, which may work, and it's settled. So it's not under threat because they don't know whether they'll be able to pay their bills. But at the same time, everyone is really switched on and enthused and still really driven by the discovery stage. So I was looking for a company that would combine those factors, not to be threatened in terms of corporate operation, but at the same time to be really enthusiastic and really alive. Because it makes a difference. The sort of the people you work with, the flavor of the team can be very nice, can be dull, or it can be really unpleasant.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And it's unless you've worked in startups or in early stage businesses, or or if you've been on that thing, you don't really know that there's this sort of sweet spot whereby it's early enough that everything's new and everything's exciting, and every day you're changing the world. And if you don't come to work today, that's a problem, because that thing won't get done, you know. But every day you're inventing, you're coming up with a new way to do things because you've invented something new, but it's secure enough that you have a business, you have a business model, revenue's coming in, or it will be coming in, you know. It's not like just, it's not a business plan anymore. And that's that sweet spot where I would agree, that's the, I mean, for me, that's the one of the best bits, right? Where you have all of the excitement, but the risk has been not completely removed, but has been reduced to a point where there's some stability in the business. Off the back of that, was there a particular, when you were looking at these medtech businesses to work for and things like that, and you ultimately, I guess it sounds like on that journey ended up at Dignio, were you trying to focus on particular themes or particular areas, or again it was just sort of serendipity that led you on that pathway?
I would say that there are certain sets of skills are transferable, and they transfer across industries, contexts, levels of maturity of businesses. So you can sort of almost slot yourself and work in anything. So from my point of view, I was very flexible about what kind of team I was looking for. I was more interested in the atmosphere and the corporate culture of the company, the very sort of, I like flat management structures. I don't like the sort of companies where you have to apply to meet the CEO, and in 6 months time you may get to see them. I like the sort of outfits where, you know, everyone's in it together. And yes, someone ultimately has to make the decision, especially when there are difficult ones, and go, we go or we don't go. But you have a very open, transparent culture where everyone's views are heard and considered, because you'd be amazed when people come from different backgrounds, where they sort of pick up on aspects and subtleties of risks or opportunities that, you know, if you surround yourself by the yay sayers, because you feel comfortable, because there are people like you will be missing out on those additional inputs, which can be incredibly valuable for business.
I especially early stage business. I mean, like, you know, it's survive or die. I mean, there's you if you make the wrong, you can make a single wrong decision, and that can be it. That's curtains for the whole thing. So yeah, no, I agree. And I think that definitely in my experience, having a plurality of opinions on an equal level, that everyone feels like they can contribute, and if they want to, obviously they don't have to, but if they want to, that they can, and having that exposed to senior management, just decision makers, is critical, you know. And when that disconnect comes in, I think you're completely right, where like if there's a disconnect between the people that are doing the work, who are really close to what you're actually doing, and the people that are making the decisions, that can cause some real problems, I think. So
yes, and you know, there are so many challenges in the early stage of survival. We have reached the stage where we're scaling up and expanding across different global footprints. So we sort of passed that initial stage of, you know, the business might fail because of one wrong decision. However, you know, it's a busy marketplace. It is what it is. You know, we're never in a green field where there's no one else. So again, that's where the strengths of the teams and different perspectives and people bringing in different ways of viewing things and doing things really strengthens the offering, and, you know, ensures that we see reality for what it is, not for what we wish it to be.
I agree, because I think otherwise, you know, with the stage of the company, and we'll get into what Dignio is doing in a second, but as the companies get larger, you're absolutely right. It's not that a single decision can kill it. I mean, unless it's a spectacularly bad one. but like, you know, within reason, it's not going to come down to a single call. But what you find is that, or I don't know if you think this is true, is that, you know, you can pick a direction, and if it's the wrong direction, you end up losing 12 to 18 months before you can turn the tanker back around again and get the thing back on track. And there could be other sort of secondary impacts from that wrong direction. People might leave, you might not win business, and so on and so forth. And it's just sort of, it just slows your momentum down a bit. But I don't know if you feel the same way.
I think we're still at the stage where we can be fairly agile and opportunistic, but you're absolutely right. It takes, you know, one of those, and you can end up investing both your resources as well as human resources into pursuing something which may turn out to be just, you know, a phantom you are chasing. So yes, absolutely. And it's very difficult to discern, because sometimes, you know, landscapes can be, market landscapes can be so fuzzy. So it's really to pinpoint, and that's where the serendipity and the luck comes into it as well, as you will know from your own experience.
It's an art and a science, and I mean, most days I feel like I'm doing a terrible job, you know, but you just have to try and figure it out and make the best decisions that you can based on the available data and based on your experience. You know, I think there's, look, luck and serendipity definitely play a part, but you know, there's this is what my dad used to say when I was a kid, but he used to say, this was at the time, I don't know if there was a very famous UK golfer called Nick Faldo who won a lot of stuff back in the day. And he used to say, look, the more I practice, the luckier I get, you know.
Absolutely.
So look, sometimes it doesn't happen that way, but you know, the more effort you put in, and the more that you're open, I think, particularly as an entrepreneur, if you start to ignore what people are saying because you don't like what they're saying, that's a very slippery slope. That's a really dangerous place to be. You know, you have to take the bad medicine, because if you don't accept bad information or bad news or whatever, then you can't solve those problems, and those problems they're not going to go away. So yeah, I would agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's informed decision. There's a reason why we have that phrase. The informed bit is the critical one, that you pay attention to what's going on. You know, you listen to both the sort of snippets of information on the grapevine as well as the official communications, and you know, you try to find your way around it. But you're quite right that the more effort you put in, the luckier you get. That's for sure. Well, yeah, if you don't try, you don't get. It's simple.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to remote monitoring, shall we? That was look, I could talk about startup life all day, but let's get back to remote monitoring. So you've transitioned out of academia, or are transitioning out of academia, working with various medtech plays. Great decision, you know, well done on that decision. What was your experience or knowledge or I guess conceptualization of remote monitoring, connected care, which we can explain in a second, but what was your like understanding of that or awareness of that, like just generally before you came across Dignio?
I think prior to coming across Dignio, it wasn't really, that was not my scene really. I was more focused on medical devices, so sort of hardware medical devices, things that do things to people, or things which I used to do things to people. So more that sort of stuff, not software. So when I came across Dignio, I like a challenge. So I've always chosen to go for something I don't know a lot about, because I think that's exciting and you can learn a lot. So software was not particularly something that I was working with, but it seemed exciting enough. And at that time, remote patient monitoring, connected care were not as prevalent or as widely known as to what these things are by the general public and care providers as they are nowadays. So it was a completely different scene. It was more about educating people about the art of the possible with these types of tools, rather than how do we optimize the use of those things. And so
that was going to be my next question. It's almost like you got a copy of my show notes beforehand. But the what was the general view, or what was in the field, in the market at the time where you started to interact with Dignio? Like what was there? What was the technology like?
There were a few companies. However, there was a great disparity between their quality maturity and how new the technologies offered were. So there were some which were created years ago and sort of remained largely unchanged. There were some which were very early stage. So you had sort of almost like a chasm where you had some companies which were very much established, but the tech was not so great. And then you had some which were very new, but the companies were not very mature in terms of their corporate maturity.
Okay, cool. So we're going to go for a commercial break now, because we have to say thank you to our sponsors for the show. And then after that, we will be back, because we're going to talk about Dignio and what Dignio does. So we will be right back. And we'll catch everyone the other side of the break.
Vitamin C supplements. Usually only a small proportion of vitamin C actually reaches your cells and has a positive effect. Whereas the high absorption levels of Goldman Laboratories liposomal vitamin C help maintain optimal vitamin C levels in your body and strengthen your immune system. Now get 10% off when you choose Goldman Laboratories liposomal vitamin C capsules. Just quote 10 off at goldmanlaboratories.com.
Do you suffer from pain? Dignio Laser, a whole new CE-approved medical device for the effective treatment of pain, is now available in the UK. Results of a double-blind trial has shown that Dignio Laser offers a significant reduction in pain compared to the placebo group. To get your special Dignio offer now, call free on 0808 501 5122 or phone number EQ Laser.
Hi, and welcome back to HealthTech Hour with me, Steve Roost, and my guest today is Dr. Ewa Truchanowicz from Dignio, which is one of the leading remote care platforms in the world. So, Dr. Ewa, let's dig into what Dignio does. So, how would you describe to the listeners, to everyone, how would you describe what Dignio does?
I think in a nutshell, we can say that Dignio's technology and methodology connects those who provide care to those who receive care. So it connects clinicians, community nurses, social care support people to the individuals who are being looked after or supported in self-managing their health problems.
Okay, and why is that important?
It is important because all healthcare systems worldwide are struggling with a mismatch between the need from the individuals and the resource capacity provided by the system. The way the care was traditionally modeled has crumbled under the strain of the pandemic. So we are now standing at a stage where we can take stock of what worked before and what didn't, but we know we are facing the world which is completely different. And I think it's about remodeling care delivery in such a way that it is delivered safely and with good quality to everyone who needs it, whenever they need it and wherever they need it.
I definitely don't disagree with that. So just to go back to something you said that the way that care was modeled has basically been destroyed, in effect. So what was the model, and what has to be the model now, and sort of how does Dignio come into that?
I will focus primarily on the UK market, because that's my baby and that's what I'm interested in primarily.
Of course.
So traditionally, there was a lot of reliance on face-to-face contact. So if you have a problem, you make an appointment, you go to see your GP, and then they refer you on to some diagnostics, assessments, etc. But your first port of call is your primary care practitioner, your family doctor.
Yeah.
The problem is already before the pandemic, there was a build-up of excess work and demand from the patients, patient-driven demand, which is natural. People are unwell, they want to be helped. But the availability of appointments is somewhat convenient at the time, which is convenient to the individual. That was already a bit of a challenge. And that was then subsequently compounded by the pandemic.
What I jumped in on you, I'm sorry. What and before that, because look, the pandemic changed everything. So got that. I guess I'm kind of interested in, before the pandemic, there was the system was already under strain at the primary care GP level, and I think everyone listening can relate to that. I can't get an appointment, or it's inconvenient. I mean, look, that's why we started PocDoc, to make blood testing easier. So I'm with you with there. But what was it? What was there? Were there particular things that caused that increased strain on the system? Was it something specific that happened, or was it just a slow sort of accumulation of different factors that led to this, like, you know, over demand, under supply? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, I think the contributing factors were multiple. So it's not that you can pinpoint this is what caused the problem. If we fix X, then everything will be hunky-dory. That's not going to happen, and that's not what the situation was before. So it was a multifactorial impact. And you have the intersection between the needs of the individuals in the population and the supply of the medical and other care. And also the other problem was care fragmentation. So you would have social care deficiencies driving the uptake of healthcare. And now when we're looking at overcoming that fragmentation of care, we can look at sometimes people are best helped to stay well, to prevent getting worse, rather than waiting for them to be really unwell and then have to treat them with high cost course of treatment. Right,
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so how would you quantify the issue or the size of the problem that remote monitoring or connected care solves, i.e. that Dignio is kind of, and others, but Dignio in this case is kind of addressing? Like, how do you sort of conceptually, because I think like conceptually everyone understands that if there's a way for me to get treated or be monitored without seeing my doctor, that's like probably good, right? But at a kind of like macro level, what is the scale of this thing we're talking about? And feel free if you want to go specific disease area, that might be easier. But yeah, what do you think?
I think I'll give you just a couple of examples of the impact. So basically, technologies like Dignio enable you to deliver care to the individual as and when they need it. And if they are constructed well, then they save the clinical time so that the attention can be given to those who need it the most. So in terms of impact, one of our projects in Solihull with a social care enterprise, Mastercall, prevented 44% of hospital admissions. That's people who would have gone into a hospital, but they didn't have to. They were treated at home or in a residential care setting. And the other impact is one of the virtual wards that Mastercall colleagues are running is a ward with people who would traditionally dial 999 as the first line of, I need to get some healthcare or some care assistance here. So from day one, when you start preventing just one ambulance call out, you have immediate impact on both the costs, the quality of the experience for the individual, but also in terms of the carbon footprint. You immediately have multifactorial good impact by being able to prevent deterioration, picking up when someone is getting unwell and treating them wherever it is that they are, rather than having to foist them out of their bed or residential setting, take them to another setting, treat them, and then return them when they get a little bit better. And sometimes not be able to return them because there isn't a care package waiting for them. So they sit in the hospital bed.
Yeah, no, we've had a lot of other companies around the space around bed blocking and things like that. No, I think it's a major issue. So we love case studies on the show. We love metrics even better on the show. So let's go back to that. Let's go back to that 44% stat, which is incredible. So just if I lay that out, what you said as I understood it, by using this particular trust or clinical commissioning group or NHS body, use Dignio for a particular reason or particular disease, particular cohort of patients, and 44% of them who would have definitely gone to hospital did not need to go to hospital because they were using Dignio.
That's correct. And actually they had a mixture of people with different diseases, and the difference between Dignio and other suppliers in the market is that our technology is flexible and generic. So it can be loaded up with whichever disease pathway you wish to have hosted on it. And because of that, they were able to run multiple virtual wards. They can set up a new virtual ward at the drop of a hat. When COVID hit, the project was already running there and was running with COPD and other long-term conditions patients in community and within care homes. When COVID hit, they just set up a COVID virtual ward. We didn't even know about it. We found out subsequently, oh, by the way, now we had X number of COVID patients on the books. So that's how easy it is to set things up. And that's why, we focused on giving people a tool which can be adjusted to assist and support the way they deliver care, not to bring in a revolution or start lecturing them about, oh, here's our wonderful tech, and this is now how you need to deliver your care. It's more about being very collaborative and making sure we underpin their ambitions rather than come in and say, here's a box, you take it and you make it happen.
Okay, I think that sounds pretty good. So with these 44% of people, what were the general disease areas within that, or a different way to phrase it? Obviously, I know Dignio, what you say, can apply to any disease area, but I'm guessing that there are certain areas where it lends itself more to because the problems are more urgent or more, it's more suited to certain things. So how would you sort of describe or explain that?
So just to give you more of an overview, our original cohort of patients were COPD patients, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Then we also run heart failure, diabetes. But from our point of view, we don't focus on the disease because a person is not a disease unit. So we focus on the person, because you can have a diabetic who goes on to develop cardiovascular complications, kidney failure, gets diabetic foot, needs amputation or whatever, God forbid. And, you need to give people a tool that can evolve and help them along their journey, whatever happens. And normally, if you have long-term conditions, it's not a pleasant thing to have. So you may develop additional mental health issues. And again, it's about being able to give someone a tool that can assist them to report on the physical well-being, on the mental health well-being, give them tools to cope, give them trusted source of information, because that's another issue in the social media age, that people can Google anything and they can cross, different spaces on the internet, which will be full of gobbledygook. And if they take it seriously, they get really, really unwell. So it's about giving the complete package and a wraparound care, which is built around the person, not the disease pathways. But the traditional groups we've worked with, COPD, heart failure, rheumatoid, diabetes, pretty much any long-term condition that you require assistance with can be loaded up on the solution.
Okay. And so with any of those conditions, I guess particularly preventing half of people that would otherwise go to hospital from going to hospital is a phenomenal achievement. I mean, like you say, there's obviously direct savings, indirect savings.
Yes.
You know, no one wants to go to hospital. Staying in your own home has huge amounts of benefits, mental health, you know, recuperation, all that kind of like stuff. So it's that's a huge impact. Could you walk us through what, like, I guess, what a patient, how did those patients interact with Dignio in order for them to not need to go to hospital? I guess, like, what was their user journey through whatever that service was that meant that they didn't need to go to hospital and could remain at home? Because I think that that's super interesting.
Okay, so I think from the patient point of view, the experience is that they need access to Dignio app. So the Dignio app for the individuals would be called My Dignio. They can download it on their own smartphone. And for some patient groups, we recommend iPads. And we normally go Apple first because we know it's a reliable product where they will have really good user experience. However, for at-scale projects, we use the Bring Your Own device. So they download the app on their own smartphone. They get a kit to take home. So they'll get the set of devices which are specific to their disease. So for example, if they're a COPD patient, they get spirometer, pulse oximeter, digital thermometer, whatever else may be required as decided by the clinical team. All those devices are Bluetooth connected. There's no pairing. So they go home. Before they leave the clinic, they get trained on how to use the devices, how to use the app. They go home, they log in. The app sends them notifications when something needs to be done, either answer some questions or do a communication with the care team or perform, measure your blood pressure, let's say. So they log in, they pick up the blood pressure machine, they take their blood pressure, that's it. It goes ping, and the measurement is immediately visible to the clinicians on the web-based interface at the other end. Okay. If anything is out of ordinary, either on the way they answer certain questions or the way that the results are, an alert will be raised for the clinicians. And everything is risk stratified on the clinical dashboard. So the whole premise of the solution is to enable the clinicians to attend to those who need their attention. So if someone is stable, doing well, they can have thousands of patients sitting on the system. If those patients are coping well and there's nothing out of ordinary, they don't need to know about them. However, if anything goes out of kilt, they can see immediate kilter, I think is the expression actually. I think the immediate...
I quite like out of kilt. I think
that's
probably
where we should Scotland right now quite a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that's why kilts are popping into my head quite inappropriately. So leaving Scotland aside, they can then see who needs attention. And the whole point of it is to save their time. So they don't waste their time doing tick box follow-ups. They actually do follow-ups with those who need it. And the other interesting thing we have is a medication compliance support, which is like a gadget that basically alerts the patient, you need to take your medication now. And if they don't, then again, the caring team can see they haven't taken their medication. So they can follow up with them and see what's going on. Why are you not completing your tasks? Why are you not doing your exercise? Why you're not drinking, eating, whatever it is that they want to load up the solution with, to basically enable to empower the patients to self-manage and to look after themselves as much as possible.
And with when you say the clinical team's looking at this, the clinical people are looking at this, does that depend on what condition you're talking about? Or is it always clinicians who are normally in a hospital, or is it a specialty? Is it GPs, or does it sort of depend? Like, who are these kind of people that are looking at this stuff generally?
So generally speaking, because of the fragmentation of care, the reality we're facing at the moment, that will be a very well-defined team. So it will be either a specialist team looking after COPD patients, or it will be primary care team looking after specific care homes, or out of hospital, out of hours care providers such as Mastical. However, the way the solution is set up, it's set up for multiple teams, multidisciplinary teams to be looking after the person. So if you imagine the person in the center with whatever problems they have, and around them are the various teams looking after them. They can be clinicians, they could be social care, they could be some social prescribing support, whatever it is, it's all, the architecture is built around the person's needs. And that's why it can change and evolve. So you need to add a team, you add the team. You need to take away a team because the person has gotten better, because they no longer need their perioperative care. You take the team away. And it's all designed to travel with the person as their needs change. And then if they need to go into care home and then they have a specific GP practice looking after them, that will be the practice that will be viewing and responding and keeping that person well within the setting where they are.
That makes sense. I like the idea that anyone can log in and view the patient. Anyone that has an interest in the patient can log in. So it's not like, I think often, particularly with diseases, because what you want to avoid, I think, is that you can't have too many different versions of these platforms for each disease, right? Because then that just becomes unwieldy, like you say, because there's so many comorbidities. I think, 80% of people with type 2 diabetes will contract cardiovascular disease in some way, shape, or form. So there's a huge crossover between these things, and it's probably going to be difficult to expect clinicians to have, okay, I'm going to look at patient A on this platform for this condition, and then patient A turns up on this other platform for this other thing. I think that's kind of, maybe that is happening, but I can't believe that will be what's happening in 5 to 10 years time.
I think that the current guidance from NHSX is to focus on interoperability and ensuring that data does not sit in silos. I think you've got double whammy here, because you've got the uptake by the patients, and if you give them 20 apps because they happen to have 20 problems, they're not going to comply. And very often the people who are most at need of this kind of intervention and support are the ones that maybe have some restrictions in terms of what they can cope with. And on the other hand, when you have clinicians, they're busy. The last thing they want to do, is to spend their working day logging in and out of various systems. So I think one has to be mindful. Absolutely. So one has to be mindful that when you're introducing tech to support care, you need to focus at both user groups, because there's no point giving patients fantastic tech that they love, but the clinicians have zero interest in the data and they don't want to see it, or they're swamped. And on the other hand, you give clinicians a tool where they really love the data points they're receiving, but the patients are non-compliant. So there are no data points to look at, because the patients are not using it. Absolutely.
It's the best system ever, but just has zero data on it. No, I think it's like, you got to have both sides. So if Dignio isn't being used, or put it differently, prior to Dignio being available, or other things like this being available, or if they're not being used, what's happening in a healthcare system right now?
So there's much bigger uptake of digital tools at the moment, but prior to that, and still there are pockets where people will have paper records and they will use telephones. So they'll have clinicians attempting to make a phone call and failing multiple times, wasting the time, and then dialing again. And if anyone tells me that's a good use of clinical time, of a highly skilled professional's time, I would really question how it is. So that's what the risk stratification tools are replacing that.
But that's a great, look, the way you phrased it's brilliant. Who is making the case that clinicians calling people is a good use of their time? Are there people genuinely making that case, and there's like a genuine counter argument to platforms like Dignio, or is it just a kind of a inevitable, it's a question of time, and it's inertia that's stopping them converting over? Or what do you think?
I'm not sure what the motivations are, but we are still seeing presence of this kind of telephony service. So for example, oximetry at home, it was all rolled out, and there were large sites where it was rolled out, but a lot of those sites would have been that paper diary to the patient, pulse oximeter to the patient, and a telephone call once a day. And if your patient suffers silent hypoxia in between, if they suffer any other complications, you wouldn't know.
Yeah, well, I think leaving aside the impact of the pandemic and leaving aside all of these kind of, I guess, very acute conditions that we find ourselves in or under, you wouldn't, if you had a blank sheet of paper, a system whereby there's a doctor calling someone every day to check if they did the thing, that doesn't strike me as a scalable system, irrespective of what the other, whatever else is happening in the world.
It's not sustainable. It is, however, really easy to deploy. It's really easy to set up. So you just set up, people phoning people, and no risk. Nobody's going to lose their job because they told the doctors to phone patients, right?
I guess so. Well, look, there's a lot more questions I want to dig into about Dignio and where it's going. So we're going to do another quick break for some more commercials, and then we'll be right back with Dr. Ewa Truchanowicz from Dignio.
AI light is the quantum energy emitted from the universe, from the sun and stars. Solar power Dino humanitarian and scalar light researcher has Europe's only scalar light viewing system, a system that can bring long-distance viewing and wellness to humans, pets, and plants via a photograph. Get your free 15-day trial now at scalarlight.com. Or become a scalar light member on the UK Health Radio website. Shields like masks are top of mind right now, but did you know you have inner armor working constantly to protect you from pathogens? It keeps you healthy and thriving. It's your immune system. Ion Gut triggers the body's natural ability to support gut strength all year long, so your immune system can protect you when you need it the most. How are you treating your inner armor? Visit uk.ionbiome.com to learn more. Ion Gut. Protect what protects you.
Hello and welcome back to the final part of this week's HealthTech Hour with Dr. Ewa Truchanowicz from Dignio. So, Ewa, want to follow up on the things that you were just saying. One of the things that you were saying is that patients patients find it hard enough to use one app, let alone multiple apps. So why does this remote monitoring matter to patients? Like what, or rather a different way to phrase it, what is a patient generally, what is their reaction to this type of technology, specifically Dignio or just in general? You know, what's their kind of reaction to it?
Well, the usual assumption that we hear is, you know, that frail elderly will not use tech. Our experience has proven that is not true. And then there are various other patient groups that get.
What's the oldest person that uses Dignio or has used Dignio?
In Norway at the moment, I think our oldest users is 100 plus. The oldest chap we trained, the oldest chap we trained in the UK was 84.
That's cool.
Using own smartphone and using
Wow.
Bluetooth enabled pulse oximeter and digital thermometer. It took about 20 minutes to do the training session on the devices and the app. Because we've worked so closely with the end users, we made sure that the way the app presents itself and the way the whole journey through the navigation through the app is as user-friendly and as simple as possible. So we have really high compliance rates. In one of the projects in the West Midlands, we had 90% of patients saying they would recommend it to their friends, 100% of clinicians saying I would recommend that to a colleague. Because of the experiences that patients use it, clinicians like what they see. It's useful data. It's something that supports the care. And what we like to describe our solution is not remote patient monitoring. That is sort of like passive, you know, you're sort of getting data feeds from people. So we like to talk about connected care because we focus on connecting those who need care with those who provide that care on an ongoing basis. So whenever there's an increased need, you can respond to that increased need via the solution. And again, if someone is stable and well and wants to be left and can be left alone, then you leave them alone.
So connected care for you is the process of connecting a patient digitally with the care that they need in an efficient way, that efficient for the healthcare provider because it's not face-to-face, and that healthcare provider can provide care to many thousands of people at the same time, but also efficient for the end user, for the patient, because they can go about their life within reason that they were otherwise doing, and also receive round the clock, you know, connection to someone that can give them care if they need it.
Precisely. So the biggest anxiety about technology from the patient users when various people run stakeholder meetings was that they'll feel they'll be abandoned with tech. So they'll be given a box and they will never see a nurse or a clinician or
never talk to anyone.
Absolutely.
You know,
they'll
have a problem and no one will, yeah.
So the purpose of our solution is to make people feel that they're connected, that yes, there's this tech support, but it's part and parcel of the care pathway. It's not something that either or. And it's there to make them feel really safe. And the feedback we have from patient users is that the first thing that it does for them is feeling of safety, a reduction in anxiety, learning about what makes them better, what makes them worse. So when you say they can go about their business, absolutely. They stop being controlled by the illnesses. They start being in control because they learn about what is it that I'm suffering from. On days like this, I feel okay, so I can do a lot more. And on days like this, I don't feel that great, and therefore I should maybe reduce my activity.
This is one of the things that I think is that instead of preventing people or quote protecting people from their biological data or their biomarkers by actually educating them and allowing them to track them themselves. They understand their conditions more. They actually understand why measuring your O2 levels is important, or having a lower blood pressure is important, and they can start to see, I don't know if this is the case, but I suspect it would be, is as you sort of hinted at, is like understanding the interplay between, oh, if I live my life in this way, this is what happens to my markers, and this is what happens to my condition, right? And they can understand the connection between them a bit more, would be that's my belief, but I don't know what you think.
Well, certainly based on our experiences, both in Norway and in the UK, the sort of having those tools helps you with behavioral change. So if you know that certain things make you better, certain things make you worse, you will always have a small minority which will be very resource intensive and will always need this additional support. But majority of people, if you give them the correct tools to support their self-care, self-management, which are personalized to them as an individual, it's not something that comes out of the box and tells them how they should be. So the whole premise of our solution is to make sure that what is given to the person as the self-management plan actually makes sense to them. And it's built in collaboration with realistic goals and proper baselines, so you don't end up triggering lots of false alerts, which are not good for the patient and not good for the clinicians who have enough data to look at under normal circumstances. So it's all about giving people tools that enable this self-empowerment and self-management.
I mean, sign me up. So what are the biggest obstacles that remain, if any, in terms of the uptake of this technology across healthcare systems? You can pick the UK, you can pick anywhere, but more just in general, it's one of the things, and we have it a lot on the show, which is that it's one of the reasons I like doing the show, is that there are so many people doing things that make so much sense, right? So is it just a question of time, or are there actually kind of major obstacles, that systemic obstacles somehow that need to be overcome?
There are differences between markets. So I'll focus on the UK because the reimbursement system is different and there's a great appetite for digital. The challenges that we face is different digital maturity at organizations. So places you go to, some of them are just sort of at the beginning of the digital transformation journey. They don't have any proper systems in place. Other places try to create their own from scratch, which is really annoying because it's really expensive and protracted and not safe to be creating tools when you have an open market where there are multiple suppliers that you can pick and choose from. Which one do you like? What is it you want to achieve? That's annoying.
It's like the record companies when they tried to build their own streaming platforms and it was a disaster.
Precisely, yes. So there's that, and precisely. And the other aspect is procurement practices, which are at the moment being overhauled. And with the focus on reduction in fragmentation of care delivery, that is helpful as well for digital tools, because you need to be able to build that pathway. So, traditionally data would sit. So your primary care data would sit in your primary care, your secondary care data would sit in the hospital systems, which was sometimes homegrown and built just for that trust and nowhere else. And then there were always ambitions, ongoing and perennial ambitions, to have some sort of a data repository where data would flow from all those sources. Plus, if you can connect, there are some shared companies records, shared care records companies that bring even data from agencies like police, social care, etc., etc. When all the data is brought together, it's very powerful. But at the moment, we're still at a stage where it isn't effectively across nationwide. Excuse me. Digital maturity, organizational maturity, and risk-averse culture doesn't help.
Right, that makes sense. And what is I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably pretty positive, but what's the feedback like from clinicians that use Dignio?
Excuse me.
No worries. You okay? You take a moment. Okay.
This is the season of all ills.
Yeah, it's okay.
The reaction from clinicians is sometimes when we look at deployments, they can be quite suspicious. So occasionally they really worry that instead of decreasing their workload, this will actually bring more work, because a lot of people have had really bad experiences in the past where technologies were rolled out with zero support from the supplier, or they were rolled out and they were set up in such a way that they ended up with data swamp with lots of things to look at, or they ended up with key performance indicators which were skewed against them. So they got lots of traffic in, which was indiscriminate. And if they didn't respond within X amount of time, that was logged as, some sort of failure on their part. So a lot of people have had bad experiences with tech in the past. So they can be quite worried about, oh God, yet another one, what are they bringing here? you know, but so we faced that, but very quickly within the deployment process, because we do a lot of hand-holding and we work very closely with the clients very collaboratively. Some of those anxieties are assuaged at the very outset of the process, but also very quickly they begin to see the gains for themselves in how they're able to organize the processes of care a little bit better and optimize them to release some time, but also in terms of impact on the patients. And ultimately, people go into medicine because they want to help. They want to make people better. So when they begin to see the impact, the compliance from the patients, the impact it has on them, the feelings of safety, and also at the same time, the ability to manage care better in the knowledge that they have something that keeps the patient safe, there is a shift in attitude. And we like to have, you know, I'm talking to you now, Steve, but that is not our preferred mode of talking about Dignio. Our preferred mode is to have our patients and our clinical users talk about what it's like to use our system, because they're the best ambassadors and they'll tell you as it is. And we work with them also to add functionalities, features, other ways of doing things, if that is helpful to them. We don't stand still, but we prefer our actual users to talk about what our solution can achieve for them.
Yeah, I makes sense. I mean, I think that the success of the platform, you know, 44% of people, just that one stat alone, 44% of people that would otherwise go to hospital didn't go to hospital because they used Dignio. That's pretty compelling. So yeah, no, I think it sounds, you know, extremely promising, and I'm sure that both patients and clinicians alike are once they get to use it, are extremely positive by the sounds of it, because why not? I mean, again, neither side wants people to go to hospital.
Absolutely, hospitals
if they
are
don't
not
have
good
to
places.
go, they don't need to go. So what do you think the next kind of like 12 to 18 months looks like for Dignio, specifically in the UK, because I know that's your, as you say, your baby, if you want to kind of do just the UK?
Yes, I think in the UK we're definitely seeing a lot more concentrated effort to make digital the way of delivering care. So there's definitely the central government reforms, the way the funding is now being released, and the emphasis on quality, not just have something roll something out, but about standards and quality and expectations of what the solutions that should be privileged to work with the NHS patients and their data, what they should look like to begin with before, you know, they're unleashed into daily use. So there's definitely a change in flavor in terms of that it's being taken seriously. The funding streams are trickling through and following. So, you know, there's this horrible saying, put your money where your mouth is. I think in the UK, we are beginning to see money being put into the digitizing the NHS ambitions. That is definitely the sort of last 3 months. There is a lot more doors opening and a lot more funding pots opening.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And so just to pick up on that point, you know, do you know, or do you think that the UK is different, better, worse, more progressive, less progressive in terms of digital health than some other markets? I don't know whether you've got any sort of good comparators.
Well, in Norway, we are present in 90% of the Norwegian territory. We are the market leader. Wow. So the appetite within the Nordics for digital solutions has been more established than it has been in the UK. UK has been very ambitious with plans and with trying to make things happen, but it's been quite patchy in the past. Now we are seeing a lot more centralized effort. But again, the reimbursement scheme longer term needs to be fixed, the way things are procured and reimbursed. So in the States, for example, it's much simpler. You know, as a digital healthcare provider, what will pay for your services and how much. In Britain, it's a little bit more of a mixed landscape. And I think we need to simplify the procurement and the subsequent reimbursement practices a lot more to de-risk the uptake of digital solutions by the NHS trusts, commissioners, and other potential buyers.
Is that because it's a nationalized system, but you end up having to go to each sort of regional CCG to go through that procurement process, like regionally, or like why is there that sort of disparity, if you like?
Well, I think
it's a difficult question. It's a tricky question.
The difference is, you know, we talk about the National Health Service, but anyone who tries to sell to the NHS will tell you they haven't encountered this national system yet, because it's very much different places operate a little bit differently, and there's a beauty to it because they can respond rapidly to their local population's needs. But at the same time, there's a messiness to it because as a supplier, you don't have a proper sort of overview of this is what's expected of me. Now it's evolving a little bit in that direction, but I think it will be a while yet before we can have clarity on, you know, this is how things happen and this is uniformly standardized across at least England. Yeah. But the vibes are all going in the right direction, so I'm hopeful.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, look, all the signs point to point to green, so to speak, here. In terms of, obviously, so in terms of connected care platforms providing care digitally outside of a clinical environment, how far technologically do you think that can go? I mean, how many conditions, you know, I know you said Dignio can work across anything, but what do you think that progression looks like? Or like, are there technological barriers that need to be overcome, or devices that need to be created in order to monitor certain other things? Like, what's your kind of vision for the future?
I think my personal vision would be taking care completely away from the hospital, unless you need something done to you physically. So if you need a diagnostic where you need to go through a machine or you need to be assessed by a human, great. But anything that can be done remotely ought to be done remotely. And there are various, you know, so things we're looking at are things like wearables, but some of the wearables nowadays are quite clunky and the adhesives are not very skin friendly. So when you look at certain populations, it looks great on paper. It's not so great in practice. So we would look at evolving technology that supports connected care delivered remotely. Those are all evolving and working in concert. And that will enable removing the care, delivering it where the person is, not bringing the person to some setting.
Yeah, I agree. That's what we're trying to do with PocDoc and blood testing. So I'm signed up to that charter. So Ewa, that's the end of the show. We've reached the end. So thank you very much for coming on. Thanks for being a fantastic guest. You know, wish you guys all the best at Dignio. I think you're doing amazing work. So yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Good. And thanks to everyone for listening, and hope to see you again next week, or you know that you'll tune in next week. We'll have another great guest. Keep an eye on the socials for who it will be. And yeah, have a great day, everyone. Thanks for listening.